Hey there, welcome to the channel. Today I will be doing another chapter analysis on my original romantic comedy series Caught in Your Embrace, detailing the married life between Evelyn, a cop, and Vivian, a gang leader. This is chapter 5 of the story so far, and I highly recommend reading the 4 previous chapters if you haven't already, with the link in the description, and reading chapter 5, which is out now, before watching this video. But without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so starting off, chapter 5 is meant to show the events prior to the ending of chapter 4, which, as you might know, ended on sort of a chaotic cliffhanger, which is why I highly recommend you reading it first. But all you need to know is that Vivian was feeling trapped. Of course, this is tied into the fact that in the introduction, in the 3-part introduction, Vivian was injured as a result of a gunshot wound, and obviously she needs to rest because I wouldn't exactly recommend doing all sorts of crazy things with a very injured shoulder. But given the personality of Vivian, and because this is the introduction, I wanted to continue to enforce the personalities of these characters because it is still very early on in the series. So this chapter is meant to very much play into the dynamic of these two characters. The first 3 chapters introduce the dynamic. This one, the last 2, is to very much introduce and flesh out this dynamic, which is very well established and explained through this one sentence, which is, of course, Vivian wasn't one to listen to people, even if that people was her very smart, first aid certified, and beautiful wife. If this lends into the story of what happens in between chapter 3 and chapter 4 and 5, which is the night between this, in which Vivian goes on several escapades in order to try and escape, in order to continue doing fun, gang-related criminal shenanigans, all of which end in failure due to Evelyn's extremely well thought out abilities. This is most of the introduction here, and I tried to establish some small details as well, like when they're trying to sleep, Evelyn has one arm draped possessively across Vivian's waist, and a bunch of these small details in order to continue to control the dynamic, and using small additional words to add more, such as possessively, which gives more or depth into the story, even though you might not know why she's doing it in that manner. That is the general of the first part. This is a relatively longer chapter, much longer than any of the other things I've written, including my K-pop Demon Hunters things, which you can also check out. But it is meant to really be an in-depth story, in this part at least. So now I skip forward just a bit of time to after they fell asleep and they wake up. Obviously, in chapter 4, Evelyn was at work, so she enters the room, gives Vivian a morning kiss, and then leaves to go to work. But she establishes once again that even if she's not at home, Evelyn can still make sure that Vivian is resting. And I continue to play up this dynamic with a bit of back and forth banter between the two. And then I cut into the most of the meat of this chapter, which is even more attempts to sneak out, because this part was more of an abbreviated one, but this one is more fleshed out. So immediately I do this really condensed paragraph in order to give the same impact as what is in the content of this paragraph, because I have Vivian race towards the nearest window, and by condensing all of this, it makes this scene feel as if it's happening very fast. Okay, I don't want to give away too much of the plot because I'm either assuming you've read it or you haven't read it yet. And here I play up another comedic thing, which is with comedic timing, which is to establish how fast and how eager Vivian is by having her struggle with this door, trying to push it open, only for it to, of course, open in a more less than dramatic manner of it being a pull rather than a push door. Or after realizing this, she pulls the door open, walks out, And then this is where we encounter a new reoccurring character, but this is the first appearance, their friendly neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski. Of course, Mr. Kowalski has been told by Evelyn not to let Vivian try and escape the house. And this plays for another more comedic timing and establishing more of the world without forcing it onto you through exposition. Of course, I'm trying to keep this chapter analysis relatively abbreviated, but after that, I have Vivian give up on this attempt because she's been stopped by her elderly neighbor. And now she realizes she probably can't escape, for now at least. So she decides to do something to entertain herself, watching televisions, trying to nap, calling one of her lieutenants from the gang. But this is all to show more and more of their dynamic, as I have another thing where it shows that Evelyn had, smartly enough, remembered to take away Vivian's phone throughout the day. And here is where I shift into establishing why, at the end of chapter 4, was the kitchen on fire. And that's because Vivian decided that if she can't run a criminal empire today, then she'll at least conquer domestic bliss. So putting on her very bright pink floral apron, Vivian began to start baking. Now, throughout this chapter, I've sprinkled hints around a bit to establish that Evelyn is at least a decent baker. So Vivian, with that misconception, decides that baking cannot be too hard and that it should in fact be relatively easy. But with an hour later passing, everything's basically gone wrong. And it's one of those classic scenes where you think at least decently competent individual should be able to cook, because it's a relatively simple action, but they are fully incapable of doing so. Once again, I continue to establish Vivian's personality of being relatively happy-go-lucky, not too concerned with the details of life, and, of course, this ends with the oven, which had the cookies, or what would have been the cookies, burning and having a lot of smoke followed out. Of course, it is important to remember that I continue to try and hint towards all 5 of the senses, or as many senses as I deem relevant within a thing, or within a scene, in order to continue to draw your attention within the story. So I use, in this case, smell, visuals, and noise. Of course, in reaction to the kitchen slowly going on fire, Vivian curses a lot, and she tries to stop the thing. And this is where Evelyn walks through the door. So now the ending of chapter 4 has collided with the midway, or the almost ending, of chapter 5. So this is where the 2 timelines converge. So this is where, right here, and then this is where new content and new story starts appearing. So they have this sort of small back and forth. It's relatively close to ending now, and this is where I continue to play up their dynamic, because we haven't got much of their married life together so far, as I've been mainly focused on fleshing out their day-to-day lives and stuff, and I'm trying to continue a more chronological story, although you can expect to see more of their amazing dynamic in future chapters if you continue to follow. Of course, I've said this several times before in my other videos, I like to end on very nice concluding notes in order to have it so that characters are able to, or readers at least, are able to leave the chapter feeling at least somewhat satisfied. But that's all for this chapter. If you wish for me to be more detailed or more explanative, please tell me in the comments down below. Make sure to like and subscribe for more, and check out the rest of the series and the other videos on my YouTube channel homepage, or reading it on AO3 with the link in description. And that's it. See you next week. Bye.